So, Mr. Waјt, you were a moderator of the panel today dedicated to the freedom of the media on the Western Balkans and Turkey. What's your impression? What's about the Balkans? How the situation goes on with the freedom of the media on the Balkans?
Well, as I said at the outset, for around 20 years we've been having major international conferences to look at the problems facing journalism and media in the Western Balkans and Turkey. And I regret to say that today's conference comes at a time of continuing crisis, massive crisis. We see media and journalism are facing problems related to the law, they're facing problems related to the media economy, they're facing problems related to the changing structure of media and the impact of the internet and so on. So we have an amazing mix of problems which have come together. And of course we've got the problems, as we've seen in the last few days in Turkey, of actually the problem of physical repression of journalists. We've had difficulties of attacks on media and attacks on journalists individually. So there's a massive range of problems, and this conference is an attempt to isolate exactly what those problems are, to take stock of the changes that there have been over the years, and really to prepare what you might call an action plan to try to overcome some of those problems in the coming period. So the European Union is looking for a plan of action to try to reinvigorate press freedom, journalistic rights, and the quality of democracy in the Western Balkans.
What's your opinion? What will be your suggestion? What the European institution should do in order to improve the situation, in order to improve the development of the professional journalism and especially investigative journalism, which is a case. We have a case that we have less and less investigative journalism.
Look, I mean, journalism is in decline in many parts of the world, not just in the Western Balkans, because less money is being spent on training, less money is being spent on investigative journalism, less money is being spent on research, less money is being spent on the people working in the business. As we heard today, there's a massive jobs crisis across the industry. What can the EU do? First and foremost, what the EU can do is to stimulate governments to do two things which are absolutely urgently needed. First of all, keep their hands off the media. Will politicians please stop trying to control and manipulate journalism in the region? That's really absolutely important. So getting governments to have the political maturity to respect press freedom and journalistic freedom is absolutely a number one priority. And the EU has got an enormous role to play in convincing governments that it's the right thing to do. The second thing the EU can do is that it can actually help and provide assistance programs which will strengthen professionalism among journalists in media. It can actually help with training programs, and also it can begin to help to confront the enormous financial and economic crisis which is overwhelming media and journalism. So is there something that the EU can do in terms of making more public funds and resources available to strengthen journalism? I think this is something that's extremely important. Of course, that must be done without interfering with editorial independence. Journalism must be practiced freely without governmental pressure. So the use of public money, the use of governmental money, whether it's from the EU or from national states, has to be organised in a sort of transparent and open way. And I think the third thing that the EU can do is that it can make a comprehensive analysis and audit of the problems of the legal environment in which media are operating and so on, to try and to create more harmony in all of the member states. One of the real difficulties you have is you have a different approach to issues like defamation, a different approach to issues like protection of sources, which is a cardinal principle of journalism, a different approach to public service media, public service broadcasting, again, which is absolutely vital for building public trust in media. In these particular areas, I think the European Union can reinforce the drive for a single harmonised landscape for the media in the region, which will respect journalistic freedom.
The whole region was engaged in the process of integration within EU. What do you think? What's your diagnosis? Why European Union has not enough leverage in order to pursue the politicians in the Western Balkans to live up from media and their hand to...
Well, I think this is a very good question. I mean, I think there's no doubt at all. In a few days' time, Croatia is going to be joining. And I think one of the lessons that's been learned from the previous enlargement process is that it's no use just getting governments to sign agreements which say they're going to be democratic and they're going to be part of the European Union just because they sign the agreement. There's got to be a political maturity which welcomes welcomes and understands what the democratic change means. In this time around, countries like Croatia have really been forced to look at how they deal with the democratic institutions, including the mass media. Is journalism free? Is there free expression? Is that a freedom which exists in reality, not just in constitution and not just in the policies of government and so on? And I think what the European Union is trying to do is the right thing, which is to say we need political maturity and a recognition of the importance of free media. But there's a major problem for Europe, and it's not just in the Western Balkans. At the moment, the European project is under some difficulty. There's a great deal of problems. We have austerity policies in many parts of Europe which are undermining people's confidence in the European project itself. That has caused a certain amount of stagnation, I think, in the movement towards European unity. And I think the slow progress that we've seen with countries like Turkey and so on has also contributed to a feeling of that, things are going rather more slowly than others would like. And I think in the Western Balkans, I think governments and the countries are looking and saying, well, shouldn't we, 20 years after the changes have taken place, shouldn't we be nearer the point of joining the European Union? I think it's a valid question. I think it's a correct question. I think they will get nearer. All the governments will get nearer if they begin to take seriously the problems related to democracy and media. If they begin to take seriously the need to change the laws. If they do take seriously the need to create genuinely public service broadcasting. If they do take seriously the need to create a media landscape which is pluralist and professional and so on. And above all, if they stop trying to interfere with media. So I think it is true that the European Union has its own problems which are contributing to delays, but I think in the end the real responsibility is with national governments. They are the ones who hold their destiny in their own hands, and it's up to them to show the political will for change.
Talking about national government, today on your panel you had as a speaker, you had a vice president of Macedonia for European integration, and you had a president of the Independent Union of Journalists. They had two completely different speeches. And what's your impression of Macedonia and the dialogue that's ongoing, so-called dialogue between the journalists and the government? If you see such a speeches.
When you listen to them talking, you could think they were talking about two completely different countries in two different parts of the world. They were completely different visions of exactly the same political, social and economic landscape. And I think it shows the gulf of misunderstanding that exists between media and politics. And I think this gulf in misunderstanding is one of the reasons why we don't have effective dialogue. We need to have a much more effective dialogue, and that dialogue's got to be based on more trust between journalists and media and governments and so on. Now, how do we build that trust? And I think one of the things we need to do inside journalism is we need to build more professional solidarity. We need journalists and media to be more committed to the ethics, the principles of self-regulation and good journalism, and we need them to work together. We need owners and editors and broadcasters and journalist groups working together to create a unified single professional voice which can be dealt with. And then on the other side, what we need is from a government is a more mature political class ready to embrace the notion that actually in a democracy press freedom means you do have critical media. As a politician, you have to live with the fact that you will be constantly criticised, and that is not a bad thing. Indeed, in a democracy, it's a good thing. So building a political maturity in which politicians will embrace criticism as an important and integral part of their democracy is a massive step forward. It's a psychological change in the mindset that's necessary. I think for us to be saying 20 years after the political changes that have taken place, we're still waiting for that change in mindset, I think reveals that we've got an awful long way to go. The problems in Macedonia were vividly reflected in the gulf between the two speakers that we had. And I would think that one of the key objectives in the next period is to bridge that gulf, is to get structures for dialogue established which will get much better exchange of understanding and a much more common agreement on what objectives politicians and media need together to identify and then to seek to achieve.
As a former Secretary General of the International Federation of Journalists, what do you think, what the perception of Macedonia about the freedom of the media nowadays?
Well, I think I have to tell you, I think the problems that have faced Macedonia's media in recent years have really contributed to an image which is a very negative image about the quality of press freedom in Macedonia. We've seen attacks on TV, we've seen attacks on individual journalists, we've seen a real sort of failure to build a dialogue which can actually sort of address some of the major problems. So I think there's a very negative impression, and I think we need to find a way of getting rid of that shadow over Macedonia. Macedonia's got an enormous problem, a new democracy, building a sort of its own independence. That nation-building structure will not work unless there is a unified approach from the democratic compartments that actually make it. And that's the world of politics and the world of media and the world of civil society and the world of sort of business working together. And so we have to find a way of working together to overcome the problems. Once that begins to happen, once we have less of the division that we saw in the discussion today, once we have more of a commitment to a structured dialogue, then I hope the whole image will change.
We heard on your panel from Ms. Choudsidis, president of the Union of Journalists, that the problem of the freedom of the media was invented somehow in some international circles in order to put pressure on Macedonian government to make a compromise on the name issue. How do you comment?
Look, the last thing I want to get involved in is a discussion on the name issue. This is such a painful discussion, and it involves everyone, and it's a very delicate matter. But I do know this: you cannot. Politicians should not look to blame media for the policy problems that they have to overcome. The challenges that face Macedonia are not just about the name, they're about building a credible democracy, a state that will work, stand alone, speak with a single voice for Macedonians in Europe. And it seems to me that sort of that nation building process, it really has to involve a new approach to the unity of the democratic institutions, and that's politics and media. We need to sort of find a way of talking together, living together, and building the future. That's easy to say, and it's tough to deliver. So we have to get away from looking for scapegoats for our political problems. Journalists aren't to blame for the sort of controversy that there is over the name. Journalists aren't to blame for problems of austerity that have developed, and journalists aren't to blame for the slow progress that's being made towards European integration. The real sort of power is in the hands of people and those who are elected to take responsibility. They must take that responsibility and use it wisely. If they do that, and they do it in a cooperative way with other democratic institutions like media and so on, then they'll succeed. That's the challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Sorry. Thanks very much.